Sheila Seppi is the author of Walk-ins, Cosmology of the Soul, and co-author of Cosmic Convergence, where she talks about walk-ins, extraterrestrial contact, holographic healing, and many other topics related to awakening and spiritual wellness. She has had contact with different extraterrestrial groups, including the Andromedans, the Arcturians, and she's here today to talk about her experiences and her books.
You are listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Welcome, Sheila, to Exopolitics Today.
Hi, thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, you've got quite an interesting bio. You've done a lot of things, and you are very active in many ways. But it all goes back to this experience concerning being a walk-in. So maybe let's begin with you just explaining, what is a walk-in, and who are the people that first began introducing this idea of walk-ins?
Okay. Well, back in 1999, I had an event, a walk-in event to occur to me. Now, at the time, I did not know what that was. I had never read a metaphysical book. I was very religious, not spiritual. And if someone had told me this was getting ready to happen, I would have laughed them out of my house, because honestly, if this had not happened to me, I would not have believed something like this was possible. But over the course of 20 years, I had been diagnosed with bone cancer, brain tumors, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue. I used to walk with a cane. I had the beginning stages of multiple sclerosis and RA, and you name it, I had it. And I was a very sick person. And I went to bed that way. And it felt as if the next morning someone reached down, grabbed me by the hair of the head, and pulled me bolt right up in bed. Then it was like lightning ran through my body. Then I was in white space. And I don't know how long I was in white space, but when I started coming back to myself, first my peripheral vision came in, and then my frontal vision came in. And as I sat there looking around the room, of course, the first thing is like, what am I doing sitting up in bed? And the second thing, as I got out of bed and my feet hit the floor, it was as if I had never experienced carpet before. Now, this was such a visceral experience that I don't think that I'll ever forget it. I don't think I'll ever forget the feelings that accompanied it. But as I got out of bed and I was walking through the room, I caught my reflection in the mirror, and I had to stop. And then I was staring, because it was as if I was looking at myself out of someone else's eyes. And then all of a sudden, my mind was flooded with all types of healing modalities that I had never studied, past life memories of this body that, first off, the night before I did not believe in. And all of a sudden, I'm having all these memories. And then I started having all these universal truths and things about parallel universes, which I had never studied, all types of different quantum physics information just kind of running through my head. The next thing that happened is all of a sudden, I became clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, just like that. Everything turned on. And that was so overwhelming, because I had no idea what was happening around me. And as the day went on, as the couple days went by, everything was so strange to me. I began to be concerned about a couple things. First off, I did not have a lot of the memories that I thought I should have. I had no memories of anything other than my parents and my children, which were very, very few. I didn't remember a lot about the children, about their birth, nothing like that. And so I was really concerned because of all of these illnesses. I thought, they were really taking their toll. But then when I began to see people walking around, or I started hearing people speak to me that no one else could see, Then I had had just enough psychology to convince myself that I was having a psychotic break. And then I thought I was having a dissociative disorder. And then I thought I was having some type of a traumatic response because of the lack of memories. And the memories, they did not come back for a long, long time. And I still, this was in 1999, I still do not have full memories back. However, I have been given some of those back. But it was so bad that my mother had sat me down on a couch and said she wanted to have a talk with me. And I thought she was going to tell me something about her own health. But instead, she was trying to convince me to go see a doctor because she thought I had the beginning stages of Alzheimer's, because I could not remember friends, families, events that they were talking about. And she really picked up on that. And so that was when I had to tell her the experience that had happened to me. Now, within the first 3 months of being a walk-in, of having this experience, then I had left the marriage because there was absolutely no resonance between me and the husband. Then within another 3 months, I moved to a different state, and that's where I found in the back of a phone directory, of course, that's a while back, we didn't use Google, so in the back of the phone directory, I opened it up and there was a business-sized ad for a spiritual counselor. So I called her. Of course, it was after hours, but she did call me back. I made the appointment. And after a couple appointments, she told me, she goes, I cannot find any evidence that you are psychotic. I cannot find any evidence that you are having a psychological breakdown. What I can tell you is I'd like you to investigate what's called a walk-in. Now, at the time, I didn't know it, but this counselor was also of Hopi lineage, and she had been asked by Chief Eva Hema on the Hopi reservation to come to Kentucky, which is where I was moving to teach the women about some of the traditions of the Hopi people, because he said that they were a dying nation and he wanted some of this information to get out. And so she invited me to sit in circle with groups of women. And she said, this will be great. It'll give you a chance to meet people outside of work and etc. So what I did. The beautiful thing about that connection was during these teachings, she taught us about shamanism. That is really what helped me to anchor into my body, learning to travel into the upper world and lower world. That's where I met my guides at the time. And they began to explain to me that, yes, in fact, I was a walk-in. And the first thing I asked them is like, did I kick the soul out of that body? Am I a body snatcher? Because that really concerned me. And they said, absolutely not. And they began to explain to me about birth plans. And they began to explain to me how during our planning of coming to Earth, we have different choice points along the way. Now, these choice points can actually be exit strategies. So if we have gained everything that we need to learn from the Earth experience, then we can exit. And so it had come upon the time for the soul to exit. And when that soul cried out to be released, I was the aspect that came in. And so it was a very, very different type of world that I stepped into. At the time, I was working for a congressman's office. And so these types of things, these were not things that I had studied. As I said earlier, I had never read a metaphysical book. I had absolutely no languaging around spirit guides or astral travel or any of those things. And yet that's what I was doing. And as I worked in the spirit realm, if you want to call it that, with my guides, then I began to anchor more and more of who I am. And I began to be able to accept what I was being told had happened to me.
Before this event in 1999, I mean, you just were leading a very normal life, a religious life, and you had become very sick, and your soul, your consciousness was wanting out. And so there was an agreement with this other aspect of you, the present you, to kind of come in and take over the physical body. And as you came in, the walk-in experience, you brought in with you knowledge, understanding, connections that would really open you up to these many interesting topics that you just mentioned, but also importantly, I guess, most importantly, heal you. I mean, because it sounded like you were a very sick person before this event, but then, so how quickly did the healing kind of like happen?
It was actually instantaneous, but I did not realize it at the time. I had a doctor's appointment that same month, and when I went, they said, well, all your symptoms are gone. I guess our medicines are working beautifully. And that was that. I never went back. I never followed up because I felt good. All of a sudden, this mother who used to lay on a couch to play with her young children could get up. I could run around. I was outside playing. We were going to the park. We were going on all kinds of adventures together. And so the children did not even notice anything happened, except for all of a sudden they had a mother that could do things with them. And so as far as this impact on the children, they were very, very excited to see all of these changes. The impact on all my friends and family, that was a little bit different because I lost every friend that I had at that time. And that was okay because they could not understand what I was talking about. And then when I would try to share with them the experience that I had, they told me very quickly that I had to stop talking about it because I had left the husband and I was going to be going through a divorce. And they said he can actually use that against you to say that you are indeed psychotic. And so I learned to very quickly not talk about it. So I did bottle that up until I moved to Kentucky and I found this group of women that I was sitting with. We were studying together and I could talk openly with them. And it was the only place that I could talk because I learned that outside that circle, that it wasn't very safe. And the reality of it is you have to think about this. This is the year 2000. There was not a lot of books about this. There wasn't anything on the internet because the internet was still in its infancy stages. And so everything that I experienced and learned came to me directly from what I now call my collective.
Bit about your guides, the ET guides. I mean, that you made contact with them. And you mentioned Andromedans, Arcturians, kind of off camera. So, can you tell us about your connection with these different ET groups and that kind of like the guides and the collective on the other side that have been helping you ever since?
Yes. When I entered into the body, well, let me back up. Prior to entering into the body, I was in a pure consciousness state. And I was not just an individual consciousness. We were group consciousness. And this group consciousness had been called from the Andromedan system. And we joined with other group consciousnesses because Gaia had sent out a signal, a resonance. All I remember was this pulling towards Earth. And we all together were working on the crystalline structure that surrounds the planet. Now, what I remember from that time, the reason we were doing that is previously there was a piezoelectric field that had been pulsating towards this crystalline grid. And the impact of it actually had started causing some damage. So we were not just there reconstructing that, but we were also pulsating in codes to help people spiritually awaken, codes to help people to be able to embrace what was happening on the planet, because at that time, that's when the convergence had happened, the concordance was happening, and the idea was to send all these massive waves of photons that came in with these light codes that would then wash over humanity, and they would be able to absorb them and spiritually awaken. And so when we were working on the crystalline grid, and I was part of that collective, when the soul of this body cried out to be released, I was the aspect that came in. And so now I serve as boots on the ground. As I began to learn more about the spirit guides, they began to show me their true forms: Arcturian, angelic, mantis, Andromeda, etc. And they explained to me that because the body that I entered was very, very sick, they came in using an Arcturian frequency. Now, the reason they did that was within the holographic structure of the body, there was already a grid that was in place that was holding the Arcturian frequencies. So it made it very easy for me to come in. But as the body healed, as I was able to pull in more and more energy, then I brought in more and more Andromedan aspects. So I have had many encounters with what I would call the Andromedan beings. I have been aboard craft. I remember one of the first times that they came when I went on, it was like, I was like, oh my gosh, and they're like, no, you don't have to come. You don't have to come. And I'm like, well, of course I want to come. And I took off running. But as I entered into the craft, the first thing I remember was the buoyancy of walking, and then things kind of began to fade. The next thing that I remembered is I was looking out of the window, basically at a docking station, and I'll never forget how the metallic look was, how as we went underneath it, I could look up and I would see like these roped structures that were attached to these larger arms that came out, and there were like little balls on the end of the arms, and they would open up, and we entered into it and it closed. And when it did, then the back of the craft opened and we started walking out. I've had other experiences where I've gone on craft and they have actually placed, one time I had a Merkaba placed into my heart. Another time, the children and I were actually cleaning out their toy room, and there was a huge flash behind us. Now, at that time, when you would take a photograph, you had the cameras, you'd have that big flash. It was kind of blinding, and that's exactly what it was, but it was like 100-fold. And then, we were still rubbing our eyes, and then we went about our business. And then my son was hungry. So we had gone up early in the morning, and I thought, okay, well, it's probably lunchtime. But when I went down, it actually was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So we had lost anywhere from 5 to 6 hours of time. Now, through hypnosis, I have been able to regain that, and we actually were taken aboard craft, and we were in what I would call a very sterile room. There were machines that had different arms on them, and each of us was laying on a metallic table, and it seemed to be suspended and it could have had something, but I didn't see anything holding it up. But there were beings. Now, these were beings really that I did not recognize at the time, but they came around and they were actually performing some type of, I'm going to call it a healing, if you will, on my body and on each of the children's body. And my son used to have very severe asthma, which, he very quickly grew out of. My daughter had all kinds of allergies, which she very quickly, began to lose. But we just thought they had grown out of it because I did not remember that until I had gone under hypnosis. But also, I have a healing team that I work with. There is one Arcturian who goes by the name of Ra. There is an angelic being who calls herself Sina. And then there is an Andromedan being, Uma. And they taught me a healing modality. And I had an Arcturian healing team predominantly that I had worked with, up until that time. But what happened was the Arcturians stood back as these beings entered the room. And they said, now we're going to teach you about the ley lines. Well, me being me, I'm like, oh, we call those meridians. And they're like, no, we're going to teach you about the ley lines of the body. And I'm like, oh no, we call those meridians. And they're like, no, you don't understand. They began to tell me about these ley lines that start at the ground and go all the way up. They intersect within the holographic grid and within the auric field of the body, but they also extend out left and right and front and back. And they connect us to every living thing on this planet. And so for me, when I saw that reminded me of some of the Native American teachings that I had about the web of life. And I'm like, oh, maybe this is what they were talking about. But each of these ley lines has their own function. They have a location. They intersect with what we call the chakras, which they tell me are energy vortexes. And then they also have emotions from the ground up. But once you start working in the spiritual fields, then they don't deal with emotions. They deal with much higher, thought concepts. And so working with them is something that I do on a very regular basis, as well as working with the Arcturians. When I call on, I never know actually who's going to show up when we do a healing. So when I have the Arcturians that show up, there are 3, and they help in the healing sessions. And they basically will surround the body of the person, and I can see what it is they're doing. I take notes. I explain to the person what's happening. I also have a being who has identified herself as an Andromedan elder mother who goes by the name of Tiamu. And Tiamu will send light language frequencies into the field of someone that we're working with. And if we're doing this long distance, she will be talking, and through the vibrational resonance of the voice, light codes will actually then go into the field of the person that we're working on. So I feel like I've been very blessed the entire time I've been here. I've had visits from mantis beings, and, they have that little clicking from the toenails that I can hear as they come down the hall, and they'll peek in the room. I've never had like a one-on-one with them like what we're having right now, but I have had many visitations from them as well.
With this missing time experience, because often missing time is associated with people being taken up by grey extraterrestrials, and they're subjected to biological experiments, sperm and eggs are taken. But it sounds like what you experienced was something very, very different, that was actually more about healing and awakening you.
I do believe so, because even at the time that I was that we went through the wormhole, that I was taken, and I never have felt like we were abducted. I felt like that we were taken into a different reality, into a different space, and they were actually working with us and on us. Now the children, I could turn my head and see they were totally fine, but they were working on each and every one of us, and it felt to me as if we were having healing performed, because afterwards we had a lot of positive experiences. We never knew what had happened until I guess it was maybe 15 years later when I actually met Barbara Lamb and had a regression, and that came forward in that regression session.
Well, I know that you wrote your first book where you described your experiences from the beginning, as you've already explained it now, and you also included a lot of other people's walk-in experiences, which was, truly fascinating. And so, I mean, I guess this was a way for you to kind of validate what happened to you, and to also like help other people that maybe were also trying to reconcile, or maybe they had accepted, their walk-in story. So yeah, you want to tell us about your first book, and what motivated you to write it, and all of the other kind of people that you interviewed that whose information is in this book.
Well, one of the reasons that I wrote it is because my collective told me I was going to write it. And I was just kind of, I don't know, because I had not publicly come out as being a walk-in. Obviously, I had told my husband, and the children knew, and, my family knew, and some of my students knew, and, a few people, really a handful of people knew. And to come out publicly and share my story, I thought, nobody's going to believe that. I don't even know if I would believe that if I was reading a book like this. So in order to validate my experience, I started talking to other walk-ins. Now, I'll be honest with you. I honestly thought that when I talked to other walk-ins, that their experience was going to be exactly the same as my experience. And when I found out that there are so many other types of experiences that people can have, and so many other types of walk-ins, because not everyone was a soul exchange. Because with me, literally, the old soul was out and a new soul was in. And so the difficulty for me, it's kind of like buying a used car. You have to clean everything out. You have to get new upholstery, or maybe you have to paint the car, or whatever it is. And the same thing was with me. I had to go through all the cellular memories that had been put in this body by the previous soul, had been imprinted within the cellular structure. And when I talked with these other individuals, and I found out that some of these people actually retained a portion of the original soul, but they had more of their higher self or other oversoul aspects that came in and merged to, complete the soul, I was just kind of blown away. And so the more people I talked to, the more I found out that not everyone has the same kind of experience. As a matter of fact, I've really never met anyone who had the same kind of experience that I've had. And so I think one of the things that I found that was one of the most fascinating, because my understanding is with the soul exchange, that's like one soul out and another soul in. But I have talked to many, many people who say, I've had that experience. One soul out, another soul in, that soul out, yet another soul in, that soul out, and another soul in. And so for me, I began to call those individuals like a soul step down or a step in, because it is a soul exchange, but it's actually a swapping of souls. Now, I talk about that one in the second book, because when I first wrote the book, the one that I found to be the most fascinating was what I call the soul overlay. And the soul overlay can really take the shape either permanently or temporarily. But what happens is the original soul stays, and it can be a very sick soul. It may need to leave. It may need to do whatever. But another soul comes in, and much like a neoprene suit, just attaches to it. And it basically serves as a battery charger and gives more life until that soul can actually go do something else and come back. And when I found out about that, I'm like, well, how can that be? Why doesn't that soul just leave like what happened with mine? And it's like that soul's mission is not finished, but there was something else it needed to do. And so some of those souls leave and come back, but sometimes those two souls merge together. And then I found what's called soul projections. And this is where you have a a host body, which is what I consider this, which is a host body, but there's an off-planet source or extraterrestrial being that's projecting into the physicality the entirety of their soul because they are wanting to have a human experience. Now, sometimes we will have extraterrestrial souls that come in, and when someone wakes up to that, we will call them a starseed. Again, I talk about that in the new book. But then the other one that's really fascinating is where you have two souls that basically intermingle, and they act, they position themselves either side to side or they intertwine within that same energetic space. And so what happens is this is then called a braided soul. And typically when a soul braids, they are braided permanently. And then there's something called soul layering. Now with soul layering, that's very interesting because you have multiple layers that incarnate when the soul attaches to the physical form at birth. And so my teachings, my understanding is the soul attaches when that first breath is taken. That's when that silver cord begins to solidify within the human form. But when that soul attaches, it has multiple layers within itself. And throughout someone's lifetime, you will have one aspect that comes forward, it steps back, another aspect comes forward, and then it steps back. But this is all because all of these aspects are coming from the oversoul, and they all have a very similar vibrational resonance. Now, a lot of people say, maybe it's just a personality disorder. Maybe someone is, schizophrenic. But what I have found, because, that's what I thought about me in the very beginning. But what I have found is typically a walk-in will be very consistent in their stories. That never changes. My story has never changed. It's only been augmented by new information that I have discovered. But the walk-in stories will stay the same, and walk-ins are always here for a higher purpose. Okay. And so they'll either become healers, they'll become teachers, they'll become seers, they may write books, they'll have podcasts, whatever it is, because they're here to help lift the vibrational frequency of humanity. And when you have someone who is mentally ill, they may have one story one day and another story another, but their behavior is just not consistent. And so it's very easy, I think, to tell someone who is having a mental disturbance happen within their psyche versus someone who is a walk-in, because I studied that pretty in depthly when I first walked in, because actually I thought that's what was happening to me. And then the last one that I'll just mention real quickly is what's called jump-ins or poppers, because they come in on a very temporary basis. They imprint tons of information within the person, and they may be there a day, a week, a month, but then they leave and they never return. And the people that I spoke to who had those types of experiences said that they could really feel when that energy left their body and when that energy came in. And most every one of them told me, and I really miss having that frequency.
So with the soul coming in, what part of the body? I mean, I totally agree that this physical body, the avatar body, and the chakras, this is all something that is biological, and the soul comes in. So where exactly does the soul reside within the physical body, within the chakra system? And also, how does it enter and leave the body?
Okay. So when I have seen what I would call the essence of the soul, as it exits the body, it looks kind of like a little octopus. That's the way that I envision that. Now, to me, When my soul came in, it came in through the top of the head. And when the old soul left, it left through my chest. Now, most people say that when a soul comes in, it comes in, through the top of the head and it exits through the top. But remember earlier when I was telling you about my story and how I was shot bolt right up in bed, that's when the new soul came in and it propelled me forward as the old soul left. So I'm not sure if that's 100% how it happens for everyone. But for me, what I have learned is once that soul essence, because it's an essence that enters into the body, it permeates the entirety of the body. And I truly believe that it works or resides within the DNA of our body. It used to be, I thought it was attached like within that solar plexus area, and it very well could be. But with the work that I have done, as I'm working on clients and I'm working with the essence of the soul, most of the time I find that it's located within the DNA.
A few people that have identified the soul as behind the heart center or behind the heart chakra, that the heart chakra is like part of the chakra system, obviously, but behind that is the soul consciousness. And so, yeah, I mean, what do you think of that?
Oh, and I have looked at that as well. And I used to think that as well, too. And what I find is, we talk about that higher heart. So we have our regular chakra, which deals because that's the balancing point, but we also have that higher aspect. And that's where I used to think that the soul resided. Now, maybe it does. But for me, when I've been working with people and I'm working with the essence of their soul, my groups always take me into the DNA. Now, that may just be because that's where they're affecting the change. But I have never been told by my collective, this is exactly where the soul resides.
So
but that is a great question for me to ask them.
Sure. So I just wanted to kind of get some clarity here then in terms of your soul, your higher consciousness that came in 1999 and kind of like had the agreement and took over that body. So that soul that came from, you mentioned the Andromedans and the Arcturians. Now that came in and that soul is here to help, to work, uplift planetary consciousness. So can you talk a little bit about what came in terms of this extraterrestrial consciousness and your kind of spiritual evolution as an extraterrestrial entity or soul that's now having this physical experience?
One of the things that really changed with me is I used to be religious. And with the new soul that came in, immediately I knew that was, I'm not going to say incorrect, but I knew there was so much more. I began to see religion as a small piece of the pie, but there was this huge pastry shop that you could look at as the source energy. And I began immediately, as I talked about God, my languaging changed. And I would talk about source or the prime source or prime source creator or Mother, Father, God, prime source creator. That was the languaging that naturally began to flow from me. The other thing that changed was I came in with an understanding about the ascension process of the soul and also how that we are all one. And so with the law of one teachings that we hear about, that was something that just kind of automatically flowed through me, made sense to me, as opposed to what I had traditionally been reading, within the Bible as, oh yeah, this is how everything happened. So for me, the way my collective breaks things down, and I have to make little charts to see how it makes sense for me. But when source energy desired to know itself with inside of that source frequency, which is a plasmatic field of consciousness, there began to develop these oscillations and these patterns began to form, which they began to call the templates of creation. And everything that we have in this universe, everything that's in every other universe, began to form in these templates of creation. And so if you take one of those templates, is a template for an oversoul, which is the basically it is the essence. It's a consciousness unit of the prime source, and so that's what we would call the oversoul. And there began to form what was called a master oversoul that held all the various oversouls that would come. And all of the various souls that have ever incarnated come from that master oversoul, which comes from that template of creation. Now, there are many, many, many layers and variations of things, but, for the simplistic purpose, you would have the master oversoul. Within that master oversoul, it would contain consciousness units that have come together that have formed collective groups. These collective groups could be seen as soul families, and they also produce a vibrational resonance. And you have other like resonance that come together, and those would form, first your groups and then your families. But if you look at those families as, let's say, a cluster of grapes, you could take one of those grapes, you would still have your cluster, but you would take one of those grapes, and that would be the primary oversoul or the individual oversoul. Then they started explaining to me, if this is the oversoul, all these little fingers, you can have thousands of these, but these are called the Shantias Khan. These Shantias Khan are still connected to the oversoul by way of what we would call the higher self. However, there is a much larger higher self that comes down from the prime source that engulfs the entirety of everything. So it's impossible for us not to be connected to source, and it's impossible for us not to be connected to a higher self. And within this little Shantias Khan, there's a higher self stream for the individual, for the experience that we're having. And when that stream comes in and it becomes part of the physical form, that's what we would call the soul. And the soul then becomes the personality of any given lifetime. But also what's found out here are all of what we call these various bodies that have an energetic framework that actually create the physical form. And so as they began to talk to me about this, I started to see how everything that I had been told, everything that I was now discovering for myself through my collective, all began to fit together. And so when someone talks to me, about religion, I see that as, one of the little pieces of the pie, but everything is so much larger, so much more grandiose. And that's all we are. We are, we are soul primarily, first and foremost, we're soul. And as soul, we have these continuous experiences in one form or another. It could be an extraterrestrial soul. So to me, when I am working with people or talking to people, we're all having soul experiences here. And sometimes we're in a human body. Sometimes we may be in an Andromedan body, and sometimes we may be in an Arcturian body. But all of that knowledge eventually will come back together in what is called that oversoul.
So with conventional religions, I mean, you have the term God that's used, and typically that designates some kind of omnipotent, transcendent being that makes laws or gives tablets and rules and so forth. But what you've describing is this kind of source energy that kind of works through this process of emanations, and you have the higher soul, the oversoul, and then the individual souls. So it appears to me that, when we're talking about the source energy and these higher souls, then that helps us to connect with everything around us. But when you have conventional religions and they're talking about this supreme God entity, that tends to be more kind of like divisive. I mean, and of course, historically there have been different religious movements. Like I think of the Gnostics and they say that, and even Plato, I mean, he described the kind of what many in religion would describe as God or Jehovah or whatever name you want to give it, as really being like a demiurge, as being an imposter, as someone that claims to be the all-powerful, but really is just an extraterrestrial warlord trying to trick and control humanity. So, yeah, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
I agree with that. And I've had quite a few conversations, with Reverend Michael Carter about that. And I really enjoy how he has taken the Bible and gone through and said, this particular God was an extraterrestrial, and here's why. This particular God was an extraterrestrial. Oh, wait a minute. A particular God? No, they all thought they were the same God. But yes. And, the other thing that I found very interesting in the very beginning was the fact that everything is set up like in councils, and even everything has governing bodies, even the earth. A lot of people talk about the federations, a lot of people talk about councils of light. And initially that just kind of blew my mind, because I'm thinking, how can that be? But, when you begin to understand that this planet is just part of the solar system that also is teeming with life, that's part of the galaxy that's teeming with life, that's part of a universe that's teeming with life, and we are still in our infancy, it's very easy to understand how, oh yeah, there must be some type of governing councils where we can all come together with like mind, like purpose. And so I would hope that religion could start looking at that and understand that, yes, we can all come together. It doesn't matter if you're talking what religion it is, we can all come together, because the reality of it is this is such a small bit of information that when everything does come together and you begin to share, you see all these commonalities.
So with this, your second book that you co-authored with Barbara Lamb, Cosmic Convergence, I mean, you clearly have a very fine understanding of the walk-in process and what that involves. And Barbara Lamb has been working with kind of hypnotic regression for many decades. So how did you find that there was sufficient overlap for you to collaborate in writing this book?
Well, I had sessions with Barbara myself. And so knowing Barbara, and I keep in touch with Barbara, not only is she a plethora of information, she is just one of the sweetest people that I know. And so as I have talked with her knowledge about extraterrestrials come from all of these hypnotic regressions that she's having with individuals. And so I really wanted to collaborate with her because, in my book, the first book that I did, one of the things was I was looking for people who had other stories to share with people. So maybe they may not identify with my story, but they could identify with someone else's. So as I wrote each of the chapters of this book, Barbara is able to come in and use the hybridization as an example. So I could be talking about the extraterrestrial hybridization, because some people believe that the extraterrestrials are here. They've been connecting genetic experiments that's involving humans, and they create hybrid offspring. They have with a mixture of human DNA and alien DNA that I call not alien, but our galactic family DNA. But these hybrids can also possess, extraordinary skills and abilities. And so then Barbara came in and she is able to share hypnotic regression sessions where people actually are experiencing this. And they can share their experience of, yes, indeed, I had my eggs harvested. Yes, indeed, I was taken aboard a craft and I had an embryo implanted. And then brought back to Earth. And sometimes that embryo will grow and be born on this planet, but sometimes that embryo will actually be extracted from the mother, taken back on the ship, and put into these tanks that are filled with a very special fluid that really is akin to the amniotic fluid, within the mother's bodies. And then we have like the interdimensional hybrids. And so, there's a lot of metaphysical and spiritual context around the human hybrids that describe these interdimensional hybrids as the individuals who actually have incarnated on Earth from other dimensions or realms of existence, and they embody into the human form, or they actually breed with humans to create a special body. And then Barbara was able to come in and to give us examples. Or like with the star seeds, sometimes people would say that they remember being an Arcturian, or they remember being a Palladian soul. And that when they came into the body, these are the reasons they came, or these are the actions that they're now taking because they possess this soul. And so it was beautiful to combine all of those wonderful hypnosis sessions that Barbara had. And I think that they really added a lot to the book, because people can look at those, read that, and say, gosh, I might actually be a starseed because I feel this particular way, or I feel that way. And one of the things I've noticed about the people that I have talked with starseeds, walk-ins, and hybrids, is that everyone feels very, very different. They don't feel like they belong on this planet. They don't feel like that, it's just life status quo. A lot of times they'll go outside and they'll look up in the sky and they'll have an affinity for a particular constellation. They have to go look at that constellation every night. And a lot of the times it's because that's the constellation that they've actually come from. And so in this book, the very first part of the book, I'm talking more about dimensions and densities and timelines and parallel universes that kind of set the stage for how it can be possible for walk-ins, starseeds, and hybrids to actually come to this planet and to be able to interact.
Well, very interesting that those are all considered as a kind of group, a complementary group, because the way I see it, walk-ins and starseeds, they come in through a voluntary process, that there's an agreement, that it's all voluntary. Now, the hybrids, when it comes to the kind of genetic engineering, often that can be involuntary, where people are just subjected to that. People have eggs taken out of them or semen extracted, and they are then finding that they have these hybrid children on these spacecraft. And it just seems to be a very different phenomenon to the walk-ins and the starseeds. And some people, of course, think that that's fine, that the hybrids, I know Barbara and others think that that's no big problem. But I know that there are many others. Whitley Strieber, David Jacobs, Bud Hopkins. They all think that this is very invasive. This is something that is a threat. And I know David Jacobs has written a number of books where he says that these hybrids are a threat to humanity. And so, I wonder if it's wise to kind of see them all as a kind of related phenomenon, as opposed to maybe very different processes.
Well, one of the reasons that I put them all together, a hybrid soul can also be a starseed soul. Okay, a starseed can be in a hybrid body. A walk-in can contain a starseed soul. A hybrid body can have a walk-in. And so all three of these very distinct sets of individuals can have commonalities when we take it a step higher and look at it from the soul perspective, because something has to animate this physical form in order for it to be able to operate. And in my opinion, that's the soul.
Now, I mean, just to pursue what David Jacobs has been saying, because I mean, he's written a book, Walking Among Us, and several others, and he says that what's coming in is the consciousness of these grey extraterrestrials, and that they want to replace humanity on the planet. So he considers that a threat, because these have like a hive consciousness, and that they are all in the business of creating this kind of like hybrid entity that they can incarnate in, and if enough of them are, because millions of people have been abducted and they're creating these hybrids. So so he thinks it's a threat, and I think that the consciousness of the being that's going into these hybrids is important. I mean, if as you say, it's just star seeds, then that's one thing. But if it's like this particular group of grey extraterrestrials that have an agenda, like David Jacobs says, then this can be a big problem.
Right. And I do know a lot of people who have shared stories with me that they have been taken against their will onto craft, had eggs harvested, and then found out later that they do have hybrid children aboard a craft. And there are a whole lot of people that talk about the grays and not being comfortable with the fact that there is a hybridization program where the grays are taking the human DNA and trying to, if you want to call it, create a new hybridization so that they can colonize the earth. So I am aware of that as well. But the type of hybridization that I'm talking about in this book, first off, I start talking about the fact of the matter is, because that we have had our DNAs manipulated over time through many, many different types of extraterrestrial species. If you want to look at it, we all are in a hybrid body. But I do try to differentiate that in the book so that people understand the type of hybrids that we are referring to. But the hybrids that I have come in contact with, they're all very benevolent. You know, I know one lady who has 7 different genetics within her own body. Her mother was taken aboard craft, and her mother was injected through the belly button with a serum that contained the genetics of seven different DNA species, or 7 different extraterrestrial species. And so when all of this then came to be, and this woman now is born, and she shares her story, she shares her information, all of the species that she that knows as being part of her progenitors are very, very benevolent species. I have not come in contact with anyone who is a hybrid that I would call malevolent. And maybe, again, it's just because I'm guided, guarded, and protected. I do know they're out there. I have talked with many, many people who have shared stories, but I personally have not met a malevolent hybrid. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's very important that we kind of distinguish between the different types of hybrids. So what are some of the signs or the experiences that someone is like a walk-in or a starseed?
Well, for a walk-in, things in a person's life just drastically shift and change. So they may not even recognize their own family. All of a sudden, they may find that they're divorcing their spouse. They're changing jobs. They're moving to a different location. Maybe they come in with a whole new memory set that they did not have the day before. I know in my case, I had a total personality change. Everything I ate changed. The way that I dressed changed. The way that I articulated changed. Everything about me changed. And those are some of the signs. When someone wakes up to being a starseed, they may or they may not initially have memories of coming from another planet. But most of the star seeds that I know who have woke up told me that within them, they automatically knew when this awakening happened that they were not from the earth. Every single one of them. We are not from here. And then they began this quest, whether it was through meditation, hypnosis, to find out where they were from. And each of these have also had a calling to be in service to humanity, at least the people that I have talked with. And so when people wake up to be in a star seeds, a lot of times they will have galactic family members coming to them in dream time. They may have one particular culture over another, or they may have a whole collection of beings coming to them and giving them information about who they are. And so that's a really good sign that someone is a starseed if in their dream time they start having all of these different visitations.
So with the walk-in experience, I mean, as you've described, it's a voluntary process. It's a kind of pre-life agreement that at a certain time the soul is going to come, the new soul is going to come in, and there's going to be the soul exchange. Now, how does it work with involuntary spirit possession? And, I mean, we have like exorcists and exorcism where people are possessed by these malign spirits that just seem to come into the body. So what's going on there? And what's the difference between a walk-in experience and this involuntary spirit possession process?
Yeah, and that's a great question because, a lot of people will ask me that. And the first thing is, because there is a pre-birth agreement between the body and the soul, you don't have, like I was worried about, oh my gosh, did I kick the other soul out? Am I a body snatcher? Walk-ins are not that. They have this agreement or an invitation to come in. If you're looking at like the photograph, like with an exorcism, that is when a soul has taken over a body without their permission. And so it's very, very different. Walk-ins have the permission. They're benevolent. Typically, possessions are takeovers. They do not have permission, and they're very malevolent souls, and they do intend to cause harm.
Yeah, I've spoken to a few people who have been possessed, and typically it occurs because of drug addictions, excess alcoholism. So it's like they engage in things that just open up the psychic pathways or their bodies to these malevolent spirits that just pop in, and then you do need to have a lot of help to get rid of them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, now you've talked about, you mentioned earlier on a little bit about, separating the genuine walking experience from delusional thinking, and how you went through the process of identifying that you weren't having a kind of delusional breakdown, but this was a genuine walking experience, and you explained that process very well. What about government controlled MK Ultra type mind control victims, where you have governments kind of like messing with people's minds and making them think that there's something they're not, making them think, well, you are Cleopatra, or you possess the soul of Alexander the Great, or whatever it is. So I mean, how do we deal with that phenomenon?
Well, I am very, very aware of that as well. And, both of my parents worked for the FBI when I was a small child. And I did have a lot of that type of influence in my life. We left DC when I was like 5 years old. I do know that once I moved to Colorado, I started receiving, well, first, right after I became a walk-in, the home that I lived in sat on top of a little hill. And there was a little road, which we used as kind of like a little private driveway, but anybody could come on it, and it intersected then with the main road. But there was a car that used to come there, and they would have a device that they'd stick out, look like a little satellite dish with a microphone on the end of it. And it got to the point that my children were very, very scared. They wouldn't even go outside because of this car. So one day I approached the car, and then I never saw them come back again. My phones were tapped. I had many, many conversations with the telephone company about that. When I moved to Colorado, I used to receive calls. Now, I'm not going to say the exact words in case these are targeting language that has been for someone else, but they would say, oh, at a certain time every day, the clock strikes blank, blank. And then I'd say, really? And hang up. Now, there were a lot of times they would call and say, oh, today you drew the blah, blah, blah card. And I'd be like, really? Okay. This happened to me 15, 20 times. I had people following me, etc. I've had computers that all of a sudden just go berserk, depending on, there was 2 other books that I was working on that that I have not published yet. A lot of the material I have lost because of computer issues and interviews that I have done with people. And so I am very aware of what goes on. Early on, I would wake up and I would have all kinds of unexplained bruises and different marks on my body. I still have some of those marks even today after years and years. This is all stopped, in my case. My belief is that it's possible, I don't know for a fact, but it's possible that the previous soul to this body may have experienced a lot of that type of, I'm not even going to say it's not a behavior, but engaged in those types of activities. However, for me, coming in as a walk-in, I think that it deprogrammed everything. So when I received these phone calls that when I have shared with other people, they're like, oh my gosh, those are activation phone calls. When I received those phone calls, they did nothing to me except cause me to go home and tell Don, the people in this town, they're pretty silly because I'm getting all these calls and this is what they're saying to me. But nothing ever happened, has never happened to me as a walk-in because of that, other than still computer issues and sometimes, being followed. But as far as any of those being involved with government programs, I do not believe that I am.
Well, yeah, thank you for clarifying that, so that the walk-in, that spirit or that soul aspect that came in and took over the body, whatever conditioning was there with the previous occupant, I mean, that because I guess your soul consciousness vibrates at a much higher level, and
Yes.
that you're more connected to your kind of like source energy. So one of the things you discuss in Cosmic Convergence is the importance of healing and integrating different aspects of the soul. And I know that's something I get contacted about a lot by people that have gone through secret space programs. How do you heal fragmented soul aspects so that people can reconnect with the higher self?
Beautiful. So a lot of times, I do use shamanic journey techniques with that to find out where those other aspects are, what needs to happen. It's a little more in depth than the shamanic soul retrieval that I was originally taught, because there has to be some levels of what you call deprogramming with those aspects before they enter into the body. But when you begin to work with energetic frequencies and you find the ones that vibrate with a particular person, you can begin to clear a lot of what has gotten caught or damaged within the holographic field. So when I'm working with an individual, whether it's online or face to face, there's a process that I go through where, yes, I will see the auric field of the body, and then I will see a holographic field. Now, to me, this holographic field looks very similar to like graph paper, and it's superimposed. But this graph paper, because of those ley lines, go all the way through, like even through the physical form. And what's out here that gets caught in the holographic field, a lot of times there's rips, there's tears, there's whole sections that are missing. And I can tell that because imagine a piece of graph paper that has been created with pencil, and you go in and you erase various sections. You will see that in the holographic field. And so we begin to rebuild and reconnect all of those little boxes, if you will, which are data streams of information. And once the lights then begin to flow, then we know that that has been healed in the person. Now, as far as calling back these fragmented aspects, that takes, I can go into the field and I can look. I'm very, very fortunate in that, like when I work with Tiamu, she will come through and she will tell me exactly what's going on. If I see a blockage, it can look like a Brillo pad. And as she starts to pull all those little threads out of the Brillo pad, it could be a soul wound. And that soul wound occurred in the 1400s, and this and this and this happened. And she'll give all that detailed information. A lot of times there will be, they look like Brillo pads, but it's not even formed yet. And that's when we can tell that there's fragmentation. And depending on where I see that in the field would depend on what aspect of the soul has actually needs some work. Now, the soul itself, it vibrates at such a high frequency that typically when it comes in, those things that it's bringing for us are all about the lessons for us to learn in this lifetime. So we may have had soul wounding. And I find this a lot of times that people holding certain thought processes when they actually expire from whatever form that they were in makes an imprintation on that soul right before it leaves, because it's like there's this, I guess you would say, like an explosion of energy, which really propels the cell to leave, but that information gets imprinted. And so within the Shantias Khan, if that's part of that data stream that's brought forward into the current physical form, then it would be that soul imprint from that particular lifetime. And sometimes that's anger, frustration. People are really questioning themselves. A lot of times that I find people who are experiencing extremely low self-esteem, it comes in from other lifetimes. And the experiences that they're having in this lifetime then are reflecting to them opportunities for healing. And if they don't take that opportunity, then another opportunity will come. And that's why a lot of people find themselves in these cycles. It's like, gosh, I just got out of a relationship with someone and I would have never thought it, but I am back in a relationship having the same type of experience, but just with a different person. And a lot of times that comes from soul wounding. So when I work with people and they're sharing this information or they're talking about being triggered by certain individuals, I say, well, what if you shift your perspective and you drop into gratitude to that person instead of anger. And they're like, what do you mean? Why would I be in gratitude? They're doing X, Y, and Z. It's like, because when you drop into gratitude, you're actually thanking them for bringing that experience to you, because they could not trigger you if there's not something that requires healing. And so when that begins to happen, healing does take place. And then a lot of people will raise their vibrational frequency. As people begin to raise their vibrational frequency, then they're able to hold higher aspects from their oversoul, from their higher self, etc. They're able to bring those frequencies and anchor it. And I really see that happening a lot right now on this planet, just because of so many people, conducting their own meditations, doing their own personal work, really diving deep and looking at those shadow aspects. And as they heal, more and more of their higher self automatically comes in and anchors into the physical form.
Thank you for describing that. Now, I've interviewed some people who claim that they've been part of secret space programs. And one of the individuals, Mark Domizio, and Jaz, if you put the banner up, I mean, he described how he was first recruited. He says that they wanted him to start murdering people, and he refused, and then they punished him, and so he left that program. But he says that at a certain point they took out they split his soul, or they did a soul fragmentation, and they took out an extract or a portion of his soul and put it into a cloned body, and that cloned body then did the kind of targeted assassinations that the people in that program wanted to be done. And at the end of a 30-year period, that when that clone died, he says that he then got that soul extract came back to him, and all of the memories of all of the terrible things that happened, that he suddenly got all those memories. So, yeah, is that possible in your mind, in terms of your experiences? Could the secret space programs or classified programs be doing this to people?
I have heard a lot of people tell me that they have had this to happen to them. And so for me, because the soul is also, it's this plasmatic form. If you have the technology that can cut into plasma and to separate it, I can see how that can happen. I don't think I've had that done to me. I hope I haven't had that done to me, but I do know a lot of people who have had this done. And many people come back. They have all of these memories. One lady told me that she was literally tortured as a child, and that they split the psyche. And with her, they actually created multiple personalities, and they would train these personalities to do certain things, but it was still within the single body. I've had other people to tell me that, just like this gentleman said, that they actually use technology that split the soul, and that it would go into multiple clones. There are med beds. There are so many things that are out there that we as the general population either don't have access to, or we don't have, all of the knowledge. And so for me, having that type of a technology is not a stretch.
Now, in the book, you and Barbara Lamb, you talk about the different dimensions, densities, and timelines. So why are those important for us today, and how do they relate to our multidimensionality?
One of the reasons that I wanted to bring that forward is to help people understand that they are multidimensional beings. Because a lot of people, they look in the mirror, they see that reflection, and they think that that's who they are, when in fact that's just the form that they actually are inhabiting. That's the body that they're using. That is the vehicle of the soul. It's important for people to also understand that they may be having multiple experiences all at the same time. A lot of times people will say, you know, I never thought I would make it past age 32. I never thought I'd make it past X, Y, and Z age. And those are, to me, excuse me, very easily explained, because those could have actually been death points of a parallel reality. And there was a resonance factor that that person felt that impending doom, or they felt that experience after it had occurred. The other thing for me, as far as the dimensions and the densities are concerned, is when I first came in, they began to explain to me how the densities are actually the vibrations that allow form to occur. So we're all right now in a third density body. But when I came into the body, I was actually in a seventh density body, because I had gone through all of those various experiences that required form. But then I was out of form because we were pure consciousness. And so they began to explain to me that with the densities and each layer and each level that we progress to and through is actually the ability of us to learn more. It's the ability for us to expand as a soul and to have totally different types of experiences. Then when I talked to them about dimensions, they said dimensions are like the precepts that we hold. And that's why that we can have people who have a fourth dimensional consciousness, a 12th dimensional consciousness, all having the conversation at a dinner table while they're in third density. And so for me, I wanted to bring that forward to share with people so that they could begin to understand that, wow, maybe I am more than what I see in the mirror. My collective has also told me that each and every person is already connected to at least 12 dimensions. So we hold within ourselves the ability to hold those higher dimensional consciousnesses. But we don't think that we do. And they said if we would just drop back in to that which we already are, we would become those beings that we seek to become. We would become that society that we're really looking for, because we're already there. We just have to remember it, because when we come in to this lifetime and we have that veil of forgetfulness, then we forget that we're a soul having a human experience. And part of the experience of life is to wake up and to remember who we are.
So is the real mission then, I mean, with the UFO phenomenon, you know, people see the UFOs, they're fascinated by them, they want to meet the extraterrestrials. But is the real goal here not so much to meet these extraterrestrials, but to go through this awakening, this transformation, to realize that we, in fact, are the extraterrestrials, that we're the starseeds that incarnated here, and that the UFOs, they're kind of like a way to awaken us to who we truly are, and that we can then transform this planet?
Exactly. I totally believe that. And I believe that as more and more people are seeing the craft, even if they don't believe what it is they're seeing, and it takes them a couple times, those seeds have been planted, and then they're sharing information with their friends. And it all becomes part of, you know, we all talk about disclosure, but it becomes part of that disclosure of discovering who we truly are, because I believe, like you, we are them and they are us.
Okay, so what kind of practical steps can people take then to kind of like arrive at that realization?
So if someone is looking to expand their consciousness, there's so many different ways to do that. A lot of people are like, oh, do I need to buy your book? Do you give me this? And I'm like, you know what? The reality is, if you will just go within, if you will drop in to a quiet space and allow the essence of who you truly are to begin to come forward. If you begin to act on that essence, if you become that essence, I always tell people there's a difference from knowing the path and walking the path and becoming the path. And when you start out in silence, you start to know the path. And as you begin to put into practice those things you are learning, as you begin to drop into deeper and deeper meditation, if you are setting the intention that you want to meet your galactic family, or you're setting the intention that you want certain experiences to happen, then you're starting to send out a certain vibration. And then there becomes that part where you become the path, where you actually start to have those kinds of experiences. But it all starts with dropping deep within. Now, some people say, I've tried that. It's not happening. I don't know what to do. I want it to occur. But here's the thing. Everyone is not meant to have those types of experiences. Not everyone is meant to experience a walk-in situation. Not everyone is meant to be clairvoyant. It depends on the mission of your own soul. But when it comes to extraterrestrials, which I like to call our galactic family, I believe that is coming, that it's just a matter of years, literally, before we do begin to have these face-to-face contacts on this planet.
So, Sheila, where do people go to communicate with you or find out what you're doing and to buy your books?
They can go to my website, very easy, SheilaSeppi.com, SheilaSeppi.com.
Okay, that's a great way for people to just learn more from Sheila. And I hope in the future maybe we can do a follow-up and see what you can share about what's happening today, because a lot of people, with this election and all the events happening around us, that they're wanting to get as much information as possible to make good decisions. So I hope in the future we can talk about that. And all the best with your new book with Barbara Lamb. And I know I'll be interviewing Barbara in a few weeks. And
yes,
I look forward to getting back in touch with you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Sheila. Aloha.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.